Today's daf is daf Tesvav, and we'll start with the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a continuation of the last sugi that we learned about Tikras Habayis, and the house has a roof. That roof could not serve as schach. The Torah says Chag HaSukkos tasa lecha, and we darshan from tasa lecha, tasa v'lo minha osui. So therefore, in the case of a Tikras Habayis, since the original creation of the schach, of the roof, was not for the purpose of sale, but rather for dira the whole year round, therefore it is not kosher schach. And now the question becomes, is there a way that I could take this roof and be machshered for sukkah? The Mishnah says, tikra she'ein oleh maziva. Everything that we're going to discuss is only relevant to a roof that doesn't have plaster on it, so that you just have the slats of nisarim that are boards that create your roof. And Rabbi Yehuda records in the name of both Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai that we have a machlokas about how exactly I could be machshir this roof. And Beit Shammai omrim mefakpek v'notel achas mi beintayim. Ubeis Hillel omrim mefakpek o notel achas mi beintayim. So we have two methods of being machshir the sukkah. One is called mefakpek, which we'll explain. The other is called notel achas mi beintayim. And according to the record of Rabbi Yehuda, it's machlokas. Beit Shammai require both. In order to be machshir the tikra, you need number one, mefakpek, number two, notel achas mi beintayim. Whereas according to Beis Hillel, all you need is one, and you have a choice, either mefakpek or notel achas mi beintayim. What are these two methods, and how do they operate? Mefakpek means that the boards of the roof have to be loosened. What does that mean? They are tied down, knocked down by nails. You have to remove those nails, and then you shake up the slats, the boards, and then you have mefakpek. Notel achas mi beintayim is a whole different story, and what that means is something called seirigin. I'll try to explain what seirigin is. What you do is you leave a board and then you remove a board. You leave a board and you remove a board. That consecutive activity is called seirigin. And that's called, in the language of the Mishnah, notel achas mi beintayim. You take out one board from between two boards. Now, how do these two methods operate? In the case of mefakpek, I understand. You're basically taking apart the roof. You're sort of, not literally, but figuratively, at least, you are removing the roof by loosening the nails that tie down the boards to the roof. And you give it a shake, and you've solved your problem. What problem have you solved? So it would seem that the problem that you've solved here is not the problem in the boards themselves. You've solved the problem of tasa v'lo minha osui by, so to speak, recreating the roof, and this time for the sake of sukkah, whereas at the rest of the year it was a roof for dira, for living residential purposes. However, notel achas mi beintayim, what it means is you're going to fill the space between one neser, one board, and the next with schach kosher, and therefore what you're going to do is you are going to remove a different problem, the problem that we had in Rabbi Meir in the previous Mishnah, in the Succah Daf Yudalid, of gzeras nisarim. They made a gzera d'Rabbanan, and they said that nisarim, let's say it's 4 tvachim wide, are pasul l'schach because they seem too similar to a roof. Well, now that you've removed the Nesarim in such a way that you've placed Schach in between, then although you can't sit under the Nesarim, under the boards, but you can sit under the Schach. Now, what happens is that imagine going from left towards the middle, from right towards the middle, and removing every other Neser from every other Neser making Schach. What happens is when you get to the middle of the Sukkah, you've got an opening for Schach. That's going to be 4 Tfachim. Coming from the left, again, meeting up another 4 Tfachim of Schach. You have now 8 Tfachim of Schach. That creates a Sukkah Kshera because the minimum size of a Sukkah is 7 Tfachim. Now you have 8 Tfachim. Now, in addition to solving the problem of Schach Posel as Nisarim, you're also solving the problem of Tasalom and Asu because you are indicating a radical change in the roof, setting it up with Schach in the airspace between each one of the Nisarim, and that will solve your problem of Tasalom and Asu. The question the Gemara is going to address is, why do Beit Shammai require both? If the notel achas mi beintaim will solve 2 problems. Number 1, you'll have schach kosher. Number 2, you no longer have the tikra of the bias, and you've simply circumvented the problem of psul of tasalom and asli. Then why bother with mafakpek? Why do you have to take the nails out of the nisara? That's what the Gemara is going to analyze. Now the Mishnah continues, quoting Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir Omer notel achas mi beintaim v'eino mefakpek. Rabbi Meir seems to put all the emphasis on notel achas mi beintaim, removing every other neser and putting schach kosher between, and he completely rejects mefakpek. We don't know why. It would seem that mefakpek, when he removes the nails, that seems to solve the problem of Tasel Lom and Asim. So what does Rabbi Meir mean by saying that Eino Mefakpek? We do understand what he means when he says No Talachas Mi Bentayim, because that's going to solve 2 problems. After all, it was Rabbi Meir himself in the previous Mishnah who pasoled Nesarim, Gzeras Tikra, and now he's going to remove every other Neser and fill in the gaps with Schach Kosher. That I understand. I also understand that Notel Achas Mi Bentayim will solve the problem of Tasalom and Osli. So that part of the Mishnah of Rabbi Meir I understand very well. But why does Rabbi Meir reject Mefakpek? The Gemara says, Bishlema Beis Hillel. I understand Beis Hillel. Now, if you recall, Beis Hillel said, Mefakpek, oh notel achas mi beintaim. You have 2 alternatives. You don't have to do both. Choose one. And Tamayu, I understand his logic. Mishum tasev alomina asui. He can solve the problem of tasev alomina asui in one of 2 ways, as described in the Mishnah. Either mefakpek or notel achas mi beintaim. Mefakpek ovid lemaisa. If he removes the nails and loosens the nesarim, it's no longer a tikra. So now he has a new tikra. He shakes it up, puts it back down on top of his sukkah, which is really his house, and he has a sukkah kshera. He solved the problem of tasav lomenos. Alternatively, to remove every other neser is also a radical change in the asiya of the house. His house no longer has a normal roof on it. I mean, every other space is airspace. So that too will solve the problem of Tasav Alomenos. Ela Beit Shammai, my timer. Why did Beit Shammai require both Mefakpek and Notel Achas Mi Bentayim? Mishum Tasav Alomenosui. We've already proven with the logic of Beis Hillel that Bechada Sagi, either one of these 2 methods are sufficient. The Mishum Zeras Tikra, and if Beit Shammai accepted the view of Rabbi Meir, again, keep in mind Beit Shammai is before Rabbi Meir, but I'm just saying if they had the same view that there's an additional problem of a neser, of a board being pasul schach because of the xeris of tikra. If that be the case, then notel achas mibein tayim sagi. Then the second alternative method of removing every other neser will certainly suffice, because now he has sufficient schach kosher, so that the sukkah is now a sukkah kshera. Why does Rabbi Meir insist that we need both mefakpek and notel achas mibein tayim? And the Gemara answers li olam mishum gzeras tikra. Beit Shammai will passel the tikra not only because of Tasiv Lomina Asui, but because, like Rabbi Meir in the previous Mishnah, we have a psul in the Nesarim because of Gzeras Tikra. For Hachikam, and now we have to reinterpret Beit Shammai. Afal Pisha Mefakpek, you should know that although Mefakpek would solve the problem of Tasiv Lomina Asui, but it does not solve the problem of the Nesarim. He didn't remove any of the Nesarim. He's got total schach pasul in his sukkah, and therefore e notel achas mibein tayim is the lo. What Beit Shammai are telling you is that don't rely on mefakpek. Mefakpek could only solve one of two problems, namely your problem of a tikras bias and tasev v'lo asu, but it will not solve your problem of the psul nesarim of the gzeira mishum tikra, and therefore you have no choice but to do the notel achas mi bein tayim. So basically, Beit Shammai would not really require that you do both. Beit Shammai was just telling us that one pu'ula, for example, mefakpek alone, would not suffice. Although notel achas mi bein tayim would suffice because, pardon the phrase, it kills two birds with one stone. It'll solve both passive also because it's a radical change in the tikra, and the problem of nesarim of Gzeras Tikra, because now you have schach kosher. The Gemara asks, Hachi Amos Seifa. How are you going to explain the Seifa of Rabbi Meir? It says in the Seifa, Rabbi Meir Omer Notel Achas Mi Bein Tayim. Avolo Yefakpek. The Seifa says that he should take every other slat away and fill it in with schach kosher, but he should not be mefakpek. Now, according to your explanation, Beit Shammai shita is that bedafka he must have notel achas mi bein tayim. Now, if that be the case, then Rabbi Meir hainu Beit Shammai. We saw that Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah quotes Beit Shammai, and Beit Shammai holds mefakpek v'notel achas mi bein tayim. And now we're interpreting in Rabbi Meir that he must have notel achas mi bein tayim. Then it's identical with the shita of Beit Shammai. And the Gemara answers, Hachi ka'amar. This is what Rabbi Meir is telling us. Lo nechlaku Beit Shammai Beis Hillel b'davar zeh. Even Beis Hillel agree to my position that there's a gzera of nisarin, meaning the gzeras tikra, and therefore you dafka need notel achas mi bein tayim. He doesn't need mefakpek. He can solve both problems with one method of notel achas mi bein tayim. And here Rabbi Meir is coming to disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda made that statement in the name of Beit Shammai, whereas Beis Hillel doesn't have the gzeras tikra, and therefore there's only one problem, kasav lo v'nasu, which could be solved with mefakpek. Comes along Rabbi Meir and he turns to Rabbi Yehuda and he says, no. You have the wrong transmission of Beis Hillel, Beit Shammai. Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai never had a machlokas about this issue. There's both an issue of tikras bias of tasav lo v'nasui, and at the same time, there's an issue of gzeras nesarim, gzeras tikra, to pasal the nesarim. And therefore, both Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai would absolutely require notel achas mi bein tayim. You cannot rely on mefakpek, which will only solve one of two problems, namely the problem of tasav lo v'nasui. Now the Gemara asks the following question. Ma'ikav mashmal under Rabbi Meir Islay, Gzeras Tikra. What is that Mishnah coming to teach us? That Rabbi Meir has a Gzeras Tikra, And therefore he passes the Nisarim, and the only possible solution to be machshir the Sukkah is by notel achas mibein time and filling it in with schak kosher. Rabbi Yehuda Leslie and Rabbi Yehuda never accepted Gzeras Tikra, and therefore in Rabbi Yehuda's transmission, according to Beis Hillel, all you need is mefakpek to solve the single problem, the only problem of Kasav Lomanasui. The Leslie Gzeras Tikra, the other problem that would require in an absolute way notel achas main time, namely Gzeras Tikra, Rabbi Yehuda never accepted it. Vafligu bechadazimna. That's exactly what we learned in the previous Mishnah. Is our Mishnah simply a repetition of what we learned in the previous Mishnah? The Snan, Mishnah Daf Yudalit, Masechet b'Nisarim, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda never accepted the Gzeira to pasal Nisarim, the Gzeiras Tikra. For Rabbi Meir Oser, because there's a Gzeiras Tikra. So we already have this machlokus. Why would that Mishnah repeat a machlokus that has just been formulated in the previous Mishnah Daf Yudalit? Amar Rab Chia bar Abba, Amar Rab Yochanan, Reisha, the previous Mishnah, that's not a case of Gzeras Tikra. We're not talking about Nisarim that are 4 tefachim wide in the previous Mishnah. Ella, what are we talking about? Nisarim Mishupim Askinon. After the carpenter created these boards of wood, he did what's called Mishupim. He started scraping them down and smoothing them out and making them chalakim umishuyafim, and now they're ready for use. Says Rabbi Meir in the previous Mishnah, Mishum Gzeras Kalim Naguba. We're talking about Nisarim that are less than 4 tefachim. There's a different problem that Rabbi Meir has with Succah, and that's called Gzeras Kalim. Now again, keep in mind, these Nisarim are not Kalim, and they're not Makabel Tumah. They don't have a base kibble that's called Shute Kliates. Without a receptacle, wooden Kalim, which are flat, are not susceptible to Tumah. But once he does the shifshuv, and he smooths it out, he planes it out, as we'd say, plane, P-L-A-N-E, then at that point, it really looks like a Kli. It's Royal Shimush. And now, there's a Gzeira, according to Rabbi Meir, to passel these Nisarim, not because the Gzeira is Tikra, but because the Gzeira is Kalim. It really looks like a Kalim. Everybody thinks it's a Kalim. Everybody thinks it's Makabel Tumah, and therefore, it's possible. If we're going to allow him to use these Nisarim Mishuyafim as schach, people will think I can use Kalim as schach. They would not differentiate between the two. And Rabbi Yehuda doesn't accept the Gzeira of Mishum Kalim, and therefore you're allowed to be Masechet with these Nisarim Mishuyafim. And that's not the second Mishnah. The second Mishnah, meaning this recent Mishnah Daf Tesvav, that's taka Nisarim that are 4 tefachim wide, and there the issue is Mishum Gzeras Tikra, and they're not Mishuyafim in our Mishnah. So the Gemara asks if Rabbi Yochanan is correct. Will Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav the Amar Succah b'chitzim Scharim Sheira b'nekevis psula v'lo gazar Scharim atu nekevis? We have 2 types of chitzim, right? You have a chitz that has a base kibul. That's called a feminine version of a chitz, right? So it's hollow, and then you put the rosh hachitz, the arrowhead, into that hollow. And that for sure is called a base kibul. And even though it's wood, it's makabel tum. It's absolutely possible for schach. But then you have what's called chitzim scharim. And they have a protrusion which you fit into the arrowhead, and it has no base kibul. And we learned that you're allowed to use chitzim zecharim for schach. It's wood. It's not makabel tumah. It's pshute kliates. Why don't we make a gzera? I mean, if it would have been chitzim nekevos, then it would be pasal doraisa schach. It's makabel tumah. It's a kli sheyesh bo beis kibul. is hachinami. If we're not making a gzera, we're not afraid that if we allow him to use the Zecharim, he'll come to use the Nekevas Ischach. Then here also, hachinami lo nixar, nisarim mishupim atu kelim. So at this point, the Gemara rejects this and now comes up with a different theory to explain why our Mishnah adds something to the previous Mishnah. And we're going to assume that in the case of Nisarim Mishupim, there is no Gzera Mishum Kelim. El al Karchach Reisha Pligi B'Gzeras Tikra, Seifa Pligi B'Gzeras Tikra. Ein al Chinami, the Mishnah repeats the machlokes regarding Nisarim that are 4 Tvachim wide, with regard to whether or not we accept the Gzeras Tikra, we pass the Nisarim or not. The Apligi B'Tarti Zimni Lamali, and you'll ask me, why did the Mishnah have to repeat this machlokes a second time? And the answer is Seifa, Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar Leila, Rabbi Meir. The Seifa of our Mishnah, meaning our Mishnah here on Daf Tesvav, is coming to add Rabbi Yehuda's argument against Rabbi Meir. Amaika Asrit Nisarim. Why did you postulate and formulate Gzeras Nisarim? Because of Gzeras Tikra, and you postulated Nisarim. Hai Svarla Beit Shammai Yislu, Beis Hillel Lo Gazri. Beis Hillel never accepted this Gzera. And in a machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, we pass like Beis Hillel, and you're standing on the shoulders of Beit Shammai against Beis Hillel? Amar Rabbi Meir retorted, Lo nechluku Beit Shammai Beis Hillel b'dover zevni olam. We never had a machlokas about that. And even Beis Hillel agrees that Nisarim are subject to Gzeras Tikra, and that's why Rabbi Meir quotes both Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai to agree that it's not enough to do a mafakbek, but you also have to be notel achas mibein time. Now the Gemara says, in the light of this machlok between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir about Gzeras Tikra, we have a kash on Shmuel. Hanicha l'Rav, di'ara machlokas b'nisarim sheyesh lehem rochav arba. Machlokas is about very wide nisarim that are 4 tefachim wide, and it's only Rabbi Meir who accepts the Gzeras Tikra, the apostle such nisarim. If it would have been a smaller neser, which is not normally used for a tikra, because as we said yesterday, the standard carpentry would require a board that's 4 tefachim wide, then there's no Gzeras Tikra, and even Rabbi Meir would hold that it's schach kosher. But fundamentally, Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rav, never accepted Gzeras Tikra. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda, less like Gzeras Tikra, he completely rejected it. And therefore, it makes sense that in the light of the Shita Rabbi Yehuda, Beis Hillel must have allowed using these Nisarim because he never accepted the Gzeras Tikra. El Shmuel di Omar be Elem Arba Machlokas. The Machlokas is only about a narrow board. But if it would have been a wide board that has 4 tefachim, is Havav Yishuv Divrei HaKol Psula, even Rabbi Yehuda is on board, and he has accepted, he has adopted the position of pasling Nisarim because of the Gzeras Tikra is safer than my pligi. Now I don't understand what Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir are arguing about in the Sefer. Why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, would Beis Hillel be matir a tikra through pikpuk when even Beis Hillel, according to Shmuel, because even Rabbi Yehuda, they all agree that if you have a nesa that's 4 tefachim wide, it's possible. So how could pikpuk be efficient? You need to be notel nisarim mi bein tayim achas mi bein tayim. So the Gemara answers no. According to Shmuel, we're going to have to reinterpret this machlokas. What is this machlokas about? Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Sukkah, according to Shmuel, is possible in the case of Nisarim Cheshman Arba Tfachim because of the Gzeras Tikra. But Bebitul Tikra Kam Mifligi. We're talking specifically about, in our Mishnah, a Tikras Bayis. And the roof of your house was made of boards, of these wooden boards, we call them Nisarim. And now we have a problem of Tasev V'lo Mina'asi, because when you built the roof on your house, you didn't have in mind l'shem tzel, l'shem schach. It was l'shem dira for all residents. So lefakpek would certainly be the most radical way of changing your roof, the roof of your house, and doing a brand new asiya by removing the nisarim, the bolts that tie down the nisarim, and then shake them up and put it back down again. And now he has solved the problem of Tasev V'lo Mina'asi. But he also has a problem of the gzera of Mishum Tikra in a case of a Nesa that's 4 Tfachim wide. Is Mar Savar Rabbi Yehuda holds that according to Beis Hillel, Batla Behachi, once he does a pickbook, he's Mavatel, not only the Iser of Tasev V'lo Mina'asi, but once he's demonstrated that he cannot sit in a sukkah because it's a Tikras bias, which is disqualified, now there's no Gzeres Tikra. And now the Nisarim that apostle become kosher simply by the fact that he removes himself from the Gzera Mishum Tikra by doing the mafaktek, which indicates that he wants a new roof, that the roof of his house is not a sukkah. Umar Savar Meir holds that even according to Beis Hillel, is Bahachi Lo Batla, that even Beis Hillel would agree that you cannot be Mavatal the Gzeras Tikra simply by doing pickbook, but rather you require Natal Achas Mibein Time. And this, my friends, leaves us with the Mishnah, the second Mishnah, the bottom Mishnah on Daf Tezvav Amanah. This Mishnah is going to deal with the case of a sukkah that has both schach posel and schach kosher. Hamakara sukkasa b'shapudim. Shapudim are long strips of metal, like if you've ever seen a barbecue, you put it, I think it's called a spit. And that for sure is makabel tuma. It's a kli. It cannot be used as schach. But we're going to see that he organized it in a certain way. We call it misadrin kikoros laniach aleim esaschach. So he organizes the shipudim as kind of beams to hold up his schach. Oh, alternatively, baruchos hamita. He's got beams of wood that are on the sides of his bed, what we might call bed posts. And they too, like the case of shipudim, are makabel tuma, because they're part of a bed where you sleep on it, and therefore it has the status of a kli, which is makabel tuma, and therefore it's posel schach. However, the Mishnah establishes that if he leaves a space between each shipud or between each aruchas hamita, an airspace that has the width equal to that of the shipud or the aruchas hamita, and he fills in that airspace with schach kosher, kshera, then the Mishnah adds hachotet begadij. If a person has a haystack and he digs a hole, a halal, an empty space inside the haystack, lasos sukkah, and now he has the dimensions of a sukkah, ain't a sukkah, because the Torah says, Chag HaSukkos taselecha, tase v'lo mina osui. Which means that he never really put up schach, he just dug out a hole, and now the schach memelo automatically is there. Gemara asks, how could this sukkah be kshera in the case where he leaves a revach beinam kimotzon? Now, the word kimotzon indicates that he's going to have the exact amount of schach kosher as he has schach posel, because kimotzon means that he leaves that space which is exactly equal to the width of the shpud or the aruchas hamita, the Rav Huna, the Rav Yeshua. This would seem to be a contradiction to the shita of Rav Huna, the Rav Yeshua. The Itmar, This is a Sugya Masechta Erevin Daf Tesvav that records a machlokus between Rabbi Yehuda Breit Rabbi Yeshua and other Amoraim, basically Rav Papa. And what's the opinion of Rav Huna Breit Rabbi Yeshua? That with regard to a mechitza, we have three cases. We've got omeid meruba ala paritz. We've got paritz meruba ala omeid, and we have in the middle paritz ke omeid. What does that mean? Do you have more airspace or more mechitza when you have gaps in the mechitza? If you have small gaps and the majority of the area that the mechitza circles is mechitza's omeid, and everybody agrees it's kosher. If the majority of the space, the airspace, is the airspace, and that's called paritz merubala omeid, psula. But what if you have mechza al mechza, paritz ke omeid? Machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Papa. Rav Huna says paritz ke omeid. If you have a mechitza that's equally paritz and omeid, then it's possible. It's completely disqualified. Rav Papa Omar mutter. You can carry inside that area. It's considered Rishus HaYachid by virtue of the mechitza. And the mechitza, even though it's paritz ke omeid, it's 50-50. Nevertheless, it still has a shame mechitza. Rav Huna Brei Rav Shua Omar also. You're not allowed to carry in that area. The mechitza is not considered a valid mechitza unless rove, most of the mechitza is so same, is closing the area that it's circling. And it doesn't have a shem mechitza unless there's rove omeid. But if it's omeid ki paritz ke omeid, it's equal 50-50, then it's not a mechitza, you're not allowed to carry. And now we have a difficulty how to reconcile Rabbi Huna Brei Rabbi Yeshua with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says kimosan, and kimosan means there's equal schach kosher to schach posel, and the Mishnah establishes that such a sukkah is kshera. Why? It's 50-50. It's paritz ke omeid. Amalacha Rav Huna Brei Rabbi Yeshua, my kimosan. We're going to reinterpret the word kimosan. Be nichnas v'yotze. We need a revach, an airspace between shipudim that will also allow us to put the shipud in, to take it out. In other words, we need a little bit more room to maneuver, a little bit more leg room. And therefore, you can have more airspace than you will have posel schach of shipudim. And that's going to allow you to put in schach in that airspace. And you'll have omeid meruba al haparutz. And now we turn to Daf Tesvav Amid Beis. We have just given an answer, which the Gemara now is going to reject. And in our answer, we assumed that there's more airspace than there is schach posel, and we reinterpreted the word kamotzon. So the Gemara objects. For efshel etzamtzem, there is a possibility of being very precise and meticulous and setting up a revach, airspace, between one shipud and another, or one aruchas hamita and another. That's exactly the size, the width of the shipud, of the schach posel. And therefore, when the Mishnah says kamosan, we should take the Mishnah literally, at face value, kipshuto, and the Mishnah means that the revach between each shipud that you organize is exactly equal to the width of the shipud. So therefore, we're back to square one, meaning we again have an objection, a contradiction to Rav Huna, because we're talking about parutz ke omeid, an exact equal amount of schach posel and schach kosher, which according to Rav Huna would be posel. And once again, we go back to square one. How do we reconcile our Mishnah with Rav Huna, since Rav Huna holds paritz ke omeid is not a mechitza? Rabbi Ami b'madif. Even though you're right, I'm not disagreeing with your premise of efshel etzamtzem. It is possible to make it precisely equal 50-50. But Rav Huna is going to interpret the Mishnah in a different way. The kashrus of the Mishnah is not a case of mitzamtzem, of 50-50. It can't be according to Rav Huna, but rather b'madif, which means that he wants to add a little extra space in the width in order to add schach kosher that's extra, that goes beyond the volume, so to speak, of the schach posel. We have here in the Masechet a beautiful diagram where he shows you that you have the shipudim and then the airspace where you put the schach kosher, and he adds a little extra. He calls it lahosif berevach, that there should be more of a rochav, and that gives it the majority of schach kosher. So the word kamosa now means kishir shalahem b'nichnas v'yotze. The extra shear, so we could put in schach kosher, take it out, put in the shipudim and take them out, and therefore we can reconcile Rav Huna with our mission. Rav Amar afilu tev m'shein mad. I could reconcile our Mishnah with Rav Huna, even if I assume he did not leave extra space than the shear of the rochav of the shpudim in order to fill in that airspace with schach kosher. Im hayu nisunim shisi nisanam erev. Erev nisanam shisi. Shisi means the length of the sukkah, and erev means the width of the sukkah. So whenever you have a square or a rectangle, you have length and you have width, going in different directions, like tic-tac-toe. So he says the following: if the shipudim were shisi, and they were going with the orech, right, going down the length of the sukkah, that's where the shipudim are, then nosnam erev, then he'll take the schach kosher and he'll put it in the opposite direction. You follow what I mean? Not perpendicular, but rather at a 90-degree angle. And what happens is, okay, let's just get the next case and then we'll make a general comment. Or alternatively, erev, let's say the shipudim are to the width, then nosnim shasi. Then he'll place the schach kosher to the length of the sukkah, the opposite direction. And he puts it on top in such a way that one of the top parts of the knei sukkah, of the schach kosher, is sitting on top of the shipud, mikan v'rosh ha'acher mikan. So if you have it in the diagram, you'll see that the way he organizes the schach kosher, then he needs knei sukkah, he needs schach, which is aruchim yat yosem merevach, a little bit longer than the airspace, the empty space between them, which is again the shear of the width of the shpudim, in order to meniach the shpudim shelo yiplu. He wants to make sure that when he puts his schach kosher, he's certainly not going to cause the shipudim to fall. You know, he doesn't want it to fall on his head while he's sitting in the sukkah. So it turns out that the way Rav is interpreting our Mishnah, the shear of schach, which is kosher, is meruma al apostle. It's greater than the schach posel, and therefore it's mevatel the schach posel, which is miut, that's bata barov, and that's why the sukkah is a sukkah kshera. So we have now halacha of bitul barov, which Rav Huna could accept, and even though Rav Huna would say that paritz ka'omed is asur, but here we can be machshir the sukkah based on bitul barov. So again, the main point is that when he structures his schach kosher in the opposite direction of the schach posel, the shipudim, then he beefs up the schach kosher, and adds an extra amount in order to cushion the shipudim and guarantee that they don't fall. Here, I'd like to, before we finish the Amud, the Daf, I would like to summarize this last answer of Rava in the footnote here in the English Art Scroll. And he says the following. Rava said that you could say that the Mishnah deals with a case where he did not enlarge the gaps to a greater width than that of the width of the spits. But if the spits were placed lengthwise, then the valid schach he places across the top of the spits, which he calls crosswise. Alternatively, if the spits were placed crosswise, then he places the valid schach lengthwise. And it's across the tops of the spits. So he's got valid schach that's perpendicular, right? Perpendicular to the spits. And it's necessary that it overlaps the spits. And in this way, although the spaces between the spits are exactly as wide as the spits themselves, the total, I would add the word volume, of valid schach exceeds that of the invalid spits. The sukkah is then a valid sukkah, because the larger amount of valid schach legally nullifies the smaller amount of invalid schach. When placed perpendicular to the supports, the schach must overlap them. Otherwise, it's going to fall to the ground. Okay. So now let's finish up the Mishnah with the discussion, finish up the daf with the discussion about the last case of the Mishnah, and that is Haruchos Hamita, which are sides of a bed. And we say that these sides of the bed are not valid for schach, and we're assuming that it has the status of a kli, and therefore it's makabel tumah. Our Mishnah says that hamakaras sukkos v'shipudim of aruchas hamita im yesh revach beineim kamosam kshera. So if there's empty space between one of these sides of the bed and the other, such that it can add schach kosher in those, then he can be machshir the sukkah. So the Gemara says, so again, let's just summarize. The Aruchos Hamita, these sides of the beds, they themselves are invalid. They are posel schach. But after he puts the schach kosher b'neihem, between one bedside and the other, the sukkah is ksher. So the Gemara thinks now that even though these bed sides, these beams that go on the side of the bed, are not makabel tumah, they're not a kli, you can't use them for anything. Nevertheless, they are disqualified for schach mishum shemitchila, because initially these bedsides, the sides of the beds, were part of a bed, and they had the status of a kli, and therefore it was makabel tumah. Lema misayele le Rabbi Ami bar Tavyomi. This Mishnah should now support Rabbi Ami. Yomer Rabbi Ami bar Tavyomi sichacha bibloi kelim. So he had cloth that was part of a garment, and now it's bloim, it's disintegrated, and what he's left with is going to be something that's less than shalosh al shalosh atzbos. It's such a small thing you could use it perhaps as a patch if you have a rip in your jeans, but it's not royal shimush for most people, and therefore it's not makabel tuma. And yet, if he takes these bloody kalim and he uses them as schach, Rabbi Ami passes it. Why? Because the begadim initially, before they got disintegrated, had a Torah's kli. They were roy as a garment, and therefore they had a kli, and therefore it's makabel tuma. And the chachamim are not going to allow you, even after it becomes bloody kalim, because they're going to use it as schach, because they make a gzera, and they're going to be afraid that even though now it's a very small cloth, if we allow to use that small cloth as schach, you might come to use a larger cloth, which is more than shalosh and shalosh atzbos, which is clearly a roy lekabel tum. So our Mishnah would support Rabbi Ami, because just like Rabbi Ami says that once it had a shem kli, before it became a very small piece of cloth, it remains pasol l'schach, as if it were a kli today. So too, in the case of the aruchos hamita, they themselves are pasol l'schach. It's only because he added schach kosher to fill in the gaps. Why is it pasol? It's not a kli; it has no function. But the answer is, it was once part of a bed before you disassembled it, and therefore it once had a shem kli. And like we saw in Rabbi Ami in the case of Bloi Kalim, once it has a shem kli, it's pasol l'schach. So the Gemara now rejects it. Kida Omar Rabbi Chanan, Omar Rebbe, in the context of a different Mishnah, and we're now going to reinterpret Aruchas Hamita in a way that it really still retains a shem kli, because it's still royal l'shimush. How so? The arucha ushtei kra'ayim. The side of the bed is not just a post, it's not just a beam, but also has legs. It has only two legs. Now, what are you going to do with a beam that stands on two legs? Ktsara ushtei kra'ayim. Right, it might be a very short beam, but it has two legs. And according to Reb Chanan, this is royal l'shimush. You can do something. We don't know yet what you do with it, but it has a certain function. And therefore, since it's royal l'shimush, it has a shem kli, and it's makabel tuma. And that's the reason why it's pasol l'schach. Not because it is no longer a kli, but it once was a kli like Rabbi Ami, but because it's a kli right now. It could be functioning now. Is hachinami here to an our Mishnah with regard to Aruchas Hamita, Barucha Shtei Karayim, Ubektsaro B'Shtei Karayim, Heiche Itmar, De Rabbi Chanan or Rebbe. In what context? And as a commentary on which Mishnah did Rabbi Chanan make his statement? It's now we learned in the Mishnah in the 18th parak of Kalim, and here we'll just take a look at the beginning of Daf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph. Mita mitamas chavila. So the Mishnah in Kalim records a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham, and we start with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Mita mitames chavila." Chavila means it's all or nothing. It's got to be shlemus in its original state. If it's broken, and now you have different pieces of a bed that could be reassembled, it's not makabel tum. We don't care if it once was part of a full bed and it was makabel tum, and now it's broken into small segments. This reminds me of like the kids play with Lego and all that stuff. It's not a kli. And mitayeres chavil. If let's say it became tameh when it was whole and then it got broken, then you have to put it back together again in order to be mitayered. You can't be mitayered in pieces, in small segments. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Chachamim omrim mitames evarim. Even after it's broken down into small segments, it's still makabel tuma or mitayeres evarim. So the Gemara says, "My new. If you have a broken part of a mita, what are you talking about? How could the Chachamim be sensible and consider this as if it's a kli. What function do you have? Omer Rabbi Chanan, Omer Rebbe, here's the original context of Rabbi Chanan's statement. Arucha shtei karayim, ktsara shtei krayim. Either it's long or it's short, but it has two legs. L'may chazir. What are you going to do with a beam that stands on two legs? You can't use it as a table. It's not going to hold up. And the answer is l'mischininu aguda l'mesav alayu mishta ashle. He can put it against the wall, and he's got two legs holding it on the outside, and it's against the wall. And now he's going to attach it to the wall. And what does that mean? He's going to attach it to the wall. How's he attaching the bed frame to the wall? The Meiri, quoted here in the article, footnote number 4, if you have to have it, he says that there are notches in the legs that normally serve to support the short sides, and he can insert one end of a wooden stick in each of the notches and the other end of the stick in a cavity in the wall. Okay, so I was wondering if there's cement in the wall that's going to hold this up. He says, no, there's a cavity in the wall, and he's got legs that have notches that support those short sides. And now he inserts one end of a wooden stick into each notch. The other end of the stick is attached to a cavity in the wall. Bottom line is, in the light of this explanation of Rabbi Chanan, we now begin to understand that you can have a side of a bed with two legs, and it could be functioning by attaching it to the wall. Ulemesav alayu, you could sit on it, or alternatively, lemishte ashle, you could weave ropes between them. And since they're fit for using some function, whether it's sitting on, lying on it, or weaving ropes, therefore it's going to contract tumas medris. Okay, then Rabbosai, this is where we got up to on Daf Tezayin and Aleph, and we're up to Gufa. And B'li Neder, we'll pick that up tomorrow. Thank you so much.